kasama yung trade secretary mo, yung, di ba, yung people who will work out these things on the ground.
Wala kaming direct knowledge kung paano ang funding niya, no? But I am sure that if that was the trip of the president, no? You don't need to be too particular about where the funds were sourced. No? Kasi he was still performing his job as president when he was abroad.
So who paid for the president's trip to Singapore? For Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin, this question is not even relevant since he says Bongbong Marcos, President Bongbong Marcos, was working even at the sidelines of a racing event. But our spending is the spending of public officials, not citizens' business? We ask in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to the Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama po natin dito sa studio Ed Lingao of One News at kasama natin online Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star, Luchi Cruz-Valdes of News 5. Chiefs, good evening.
Happy midweek.
Let's start off with some inflation numbers, Ami. 6.9%.
Oo nga eh. Another 4-year record high, 6.9%. Ano? Pero hindi naman masyadong ganun kalaki yung akyat from the previews. Pero nevertheless, tuloy-tuloy yung pag-akyat.
Ano pang binabantayan natin?
6.4 to 6.9. Okay.
Well, we have
dumadami na mga apostoles mo, Ed, looking on the bright side or looking at the glass half full.
Ang papas ko yata.
Ganun ba? Happy weekend. But of course, the other story is yung kay dating Executive Secretary Vic Rodriguez.
Yes.
Finally, he released a statement, at least over social media, confirming what happened. Although he has not stated he has not explained kung ano nangyari, kung bakit lumabas ang balita na na-appoint siyang Chief of Staff at napirmahan ng AO number 1.
Pati ako nalilito ako dyan. Can you clarify that as far as we know, yung AO1, for example, was that ever signed?
Well, sabi ni Bersamin, hindi. It was never signed. And even then, we don't know which version of AO1 was even considered. Was it the version of, for example, yung kay Vic Rodriguez, the one he drafted? Or was there a different version na kinalikot, for example, possibly ni Juan Ponce Enrile?
Yung nag-announce nga ng AO1, wala na rin sa cabinet, ano?
Yun nga eh. So kumbaga yung tindahan, sarado na. So hindi mo na mahahabol.
But then, Ami, yun yung tanong ko. So may kinalaman ba yun sa nangyari kay Trixie Cruz-Valdes? Because to your point, siya ang nag-announce that it was signed.
Eh, sumusunod lang siguro siya kay ES naman. Or she cannot announce that on her own. Meron pinanggalingan yung istoryang yun.
Sinong ES ang sinasabi mo? At that point, walang ES.
Yung ex-ES.
The other thing, I think the other point was that that announcement was made when the president was not here anymore.
Exactly.
He was already out of the country. So, kung may source si Trixie, it wouldn't have been the president, not unless, well, I suppose it was not the president kasi dinay eventually. So, it would have been either Mr. Rodriguez or somebody from the staff.
But that also brings up another point related, by the way, to the Singapore trip. And I think Luchi brought it up yesterday. So who was at the wheel?
Well, alam mo, in the end kasi the president should always be at the wheel even if he's not in the country. Hindi naman siya incapacitated eh. All the major decisions can still be made by the president except that yung day-to-day...
Pag may nangyari.
Yung day-to-day nitty-gritty lang.
In the event of, di ba?
Yes. Saka yung previous trips na nag-designate siya. Always vice president.
That's true. Pero I think that's more of tradition than anything eh. Kasi in the end, the president can make any decision from anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
In this time of
yeah, he can even choose not to designate.
Yeah.
But we have to know where he is, right?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
If you're out of the country.
Wala pala sa bansa presidente. No?
And these are all relevant and important questions. But that leads us to our topic for tonight, because the current, yung alam natin, official Executive Secretary, Lucas Bersamin, is saying the other questions, in particular about how he spent for Singapore. Sinasabi niya,
hindi relevant.
that is irrelevant, sabi niya.
Irrelevant.
And that's something we're sure a lot of people have questions about. And so we will speak to our first guest to tackle that question after a short break. Keep it right here on One News. Executive Secretary Lucas Bersamin says the source of funding for President Marcos' recent Singapore trip is irrelevant. Is it? Let's ask former State Auditor Heidi Mendoza. Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to the Chiefs.
Ay, good evening po. Good evening po.
Ma'am, magandang gabi po.
Okay, ma'am, we'll go straight to the point. Whether this was a working trip or a personal trip or whatever other possible categories in between, what is relevant for citizens to ask about the, specific to the funding of that trip of President Marcos to Singapore?
Well, of course, it's the right of every citizen to ask who's gonna fund this trip, di ba? Concerned tayo dahil public funds yung ating iniingatan. And panaluna, ang gusto ko nating i-highlight dito, yung composition ng public expenditure affects a country's growth. So, meron diyang tinatawag na functional at meron tinatawag na economic. So, sabihin natin granting na functional dahil presidente siya, di ba? Kasama yan sa function niya, no? Pero pag tinignan natin, in terms of prioritization, in terms of yung situation, parang hindi pwede. But I'd like to concentrate on doon sinabi na yung irrelevant. Kasi dapat nananahimik na lang ako pero magpo-post sana ako sa Facebook ko na parang hindi pwedeng sabihin na irrelevant yung source. You know why? Nung auditor pa ako, pag nagtitraining kami, at kahit ngayon na nagtuturo ako, parati ko sinasabi, ang unang tinitingnan sa public spending ay dapat may budget. Mayroong information, no? So ang una mong aalamin, saan galing? Di ba? Alamin mo yung source. Ano yun? Pangalawa, para makita mo yung kailangan malaman mo yung source kasi that will define the nature of spending, the nature of expenditure, right? For example, if the source is a trust fund, of course, it has to be covered by the trust agreement. And the guidelines that will define how it will be used will be the trust fund, according guidelines doon sa trust agreement. So, hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na irrelevant ang source kasi ang kauna-unahang tinitingnan ay saan nanggaling. Saan nanggaling. Dapat hindi pwedeng sabing irrelevant. Meron tayong classification ng expenditure, Meron tayong illegal, meron tayong irregular, meron tayong irrelevant or unnecessary, meron tayong unconscionable. Paano natin ma-distinguish yung mga yon? Unang-una, alamin mo, nature of expenditure. Paano mo malalaman yung nature of expenditure? Babalikan naman, ano yung source ng funding.
Okay, what
na-intriga ako doon sa apat na yon, yung apat na uri ng spending na may unconscionable pa. Gusto ko lang malaman, ano mga pagkakaiba nito, mga irregular, na mga illegal, ng unconscionable, at yung irrelevant. At kung tama bang sabihin na irrelevant expenditure ito?
Okay, mayroong tayong mga tinatawag na pamantayan dito. Una, yung COA Circular 85-55A, pero ito ay na-revise na nung kapanahonan namin. I think it was revised sometime in 2012. Sandali, hinahanap ko pa ngayon yung ano tawag nito? Ano yung parang particular na law on this. Pero yung 8555A, yun yung pinakang nandun yung definition ng what is irregular, what is irrelevant, what is unconscionable, and what is unnecessary. Meron tayong mga tinatawag na irregular. Yung irregular, syempre, parang hindi siya naaayon doon sa tinatawag nating mga batas. Halimbawa, pag sinabi natin na yung expenditure ay walang supporting documents. Pwede sabihin mo parang irregular to kasi walang supporting documents.
Okay.
O kaya naman hindi naaayon sa mandato ng isang opisina. Parang halimbawa, paano ba 'yon? Kunyari itong mandate mo pero yung expenditure mo ay hindi related doon. So pwede yan na irregular,
Okay.
Ang illegal, syempre, patently against the law. For example, bumili ka, hindi mo sinunod yung public bidding, which is under RA 9184. So illegal siya, Yung irrelevant, kumbaga parang nasa Baguio City ka, malamig, December, pero bumili ka ng air condition. Yung mga ganyan, parang hindi kailangan. O kaya, meron yung mga particular, example, sa isang baryo, bumili yung mga barangay captain ng parang smartphone, pero wala naman pala silang internet at wala pang na available doon. So ito yung mga very, halimbawa, sa AFP, bumili ka ng bala na talagang high-tech, etc. Pero yung baril mo,
Wala kang ganun baril.
Hindi pala compatible.
doon sa So, marami tayo niyan.
Ma'am, ganito na lang po, ma'am. Ma'am, if you don't mind.
Sinong nag-judge or nag-decision?
Diyan po papasok ang Commission on Audit. Yung po, tinatawag po natin dahil nag-review po kami ng public expenditure, di po ba? So, ititingnan po namin kung yung bang ay irregular or incurred without adhering to established rules or regulations. Halimbawa, kumuha ka ng allowance, hindi naman authorized. O ayan, nag-travel ka, sobra-sobra yung pinamasahe mo, ginastos mo sa travel, not in accordance with Executive Order 248 or Executive Order 298. So yan, irregular yan. It's the Commission on Audit. Bahagi yan ng function ng resident auditor. Pwede siyang mag-issue muna ng tinatawag natin na notice of suspension kung hindi ka pa masyadong nakakasiguro. Pero sa lagay na ito, pag ako yan, sa bagay sabihin naman bias ako, pag ako yan, hindi na ako mag-notice of suspension, notice of disallowance kagad. Babantayan ko ito kung gagawin ng auditor dito.
Ma'am, by question, how does this all apply to the President? Is the President on a special category or level? So, sabi nga ni E.S. Bersamin, Presidente, kahit ano naman gawin yan, nagtatrabaho yan para sa bayan. I mean, does that give him some kind of a blanket or some kind of, does that place him on a higher level of consideration?
Okay. Meron tayong kailangan timbangin dito, Kasi parehas naman yan, ang nature ng public spending, it must be for a public purpose. Kaya lang, meron akong isang particular na situation. For example, nagbiyahe ang isang presidente. Nakalib siya, pero kailangan niyang magbiyahe. So definitely, private yung trip, wala yung expenses sa government. Pero he is the president. Kailangan niya magdala ng security. Tama?
Correct.
Sino magbabayad ngayon ng pamasahe ng security? The government. Kasi it is in line with yung position niya sa presidente. Hindi naman kamo nakalib siya, babayaran niya yun. Hindi pwede namang bayaran ng state. Kasi that is within the function of the di ba?
Yes, ma'am.
Pero ito, iba ito
Yes, ma'am.
Presidente ka, yes, you are doing something, babalik tayo dun sa classification of expenditure. Yung tinatawag ko kaninang economic and functional. Sabihin natin functional, tama, presidente ka. Pero meron tayong tinatawag na productive and non-productive expenses. Di ba? Yun yung ating Kaya, pinapag-aralan.
Productive daw to.
Ma'am, but in this particular case, ma'am, si Secretary Bersamin was saying, acknowledged ni Secretary Bersamin that this was a personal trip. And by the way, the president also met na rin with some businessmen and officials in Singapore. On the other hand, apparently ginamit nila ang presidential jet So that's public funds, public gas, public
With the wife and
equipment,
son.
and with the entire caboodle. So how would you qualify this? It's a personal trip na, by the way, I can also meet with certain people, but I'm using the public jet.
Okay, ito yung sinasabi natin na nagkakaroon ng discretion in terms of ano-ano. Para sa akin, syempre you cannot live without your security, presidente ka. Sasabihin mo, I need to use the extravagance yun. Kasi you can commute, di ba? Pwede kang sumakay sa magdala ka ng security, etc. Pwede bayaran ng
Pwede ka magpal, ganun.
Pero ibig ko sabihin, ito yung tinatawag nating value for money. Okay? Madami tayong pinag-aaralan. Pag sinabing value for money, okay, pwede mo sabihin, personal to, personal leave. But still, bound ka nung na you have to the value for money. Okay, personal to, kaya sabihin mo, hindi, magsa-sideline ako, magbi-business din ako, magkakaroon ako ng mga sideline meetings, investments, etc. Kaya lang magkakaroon ng gray area, di ba? Alin doon yung extent na gagawin mong to be by the public. Pero ang pamantayan dito ay yung parati nating sinasabi. Nung nagtitraining kami as auditors, and I know, ito rin, madalas nito lumalabas sa mga Supreme Court decision. Ang pamantayan natin yung tinatawag nating the prudence of a good father of a family. Nagtuturo ako ng public fiscal, every time na siniset ko sa kanila para madali nilang maintindihan. Kasi naintindihan ko, napaka-crucial ng maintindihan ng estudyante yung public fiscal. Pero paano mo siya ituturo? Always from the point of view of a personal laging ganon ang dating para madaling maintindihan. So sabi ko, okay, pag sa public fiscal, ano yung pamantayan kung pasok yung expenses or what? It should be within the standards of the prudence of a good father of the family. The prudence and diligence of a good father of the family. So yun yung question.
Ms. Mendoza, paano kapag kasi sinabi nila it's a personal trip. Meron bang metrics kung ano yung dapat na maging official trip sa gobyerno? Meron bang mga classifications dyan? Para maging conditions to be met?
Para maging official yung trip, una may official purpose. Diba? So may official purpose. And then of course, kaya lang siya yung presidente. Ito nga yung sinasabi ko pag hindi ka presidente, kunyari kami, head of agency ka, magpa-file ka ng tinatawag nating official business o kumbaga parang travel authority, di ba? I-state mo doon kung personal yan or official. Bago ka makalabas ng airport, hahanapin din yan sa immigration di ba? Pag itineclare mo na government employee ka, you have to show your official trip, di ba? Now, pag sinabi mong official trip, ayun, carry lahat yung expenses official, But it doesn't mean na lahat-lahat pwedeng i-charge. Dapat tingnan natin yung sabi ko ng prudence of a good father of a family. Meron niyang limits, di ba? Kunyari, ang pang-hotel mo, eto lang, ang kain mo, eto lang. Pero siyempre, dahil presidente ka, meron pa rin legroom yan, meron tayong tinatawag na actual expenditure. Kumbaga, siyempre, nandun ka sa Geneva, doon sa panahon ng World Health Conference, lahat ng hotel mahal. Maiisip mo yung budget. Merong case-to-case basis na tinatawag.
Now, ma'am, doon na
Merong conflicting statements, Sinasabi nila, the president is entitled to a personal downtime, It's a personal visit. He's entitled to rest. Pero at the same time,
araw ba yun?
nagtatrabaho
Anong araw ba yun?
Sabado, Linggo.
Sabado. Okay naman. Tama naman yun. Personal downtime. Pero di ba?
Pero sinasabi din at the same time,
gagamitin mo ba yung nababayaran ng taong bayan? Di ba yun hirap yung tao mo Again, I'll go to the You have to distinguish economic and functional spending. Okay? And then productive and non-productive. Ayoko mag-draw ng I leave it to them. Baka sabihin, wala na ako sa gobyerno. Kung ako public official, alam ko how to behave given those. Malinaw yung parameters, malinaw yung batas. At kahit yung auditors, walang gray area dyan. It's very clear.
Malinaw naman po, I think, yung principles and values here. Now, let's talk about the practicalities. From the point of view of the COA and of citizens who want transparency, kaya ba natin matrack? Given that, as you said, sometimes, especially for the president, baka nag-blur yung lines, alin dyan ang private, alin dyan ang public spending. But it's a given that there will have been public spending on this. Kahit anong mangyari, imposibleng zero. Can you track it down to the centavo on what was spent, or given that it's the president, is it possible that there is spending here na hindi na natin malalaman?
Well, sabi natin, if it is public spending, dapat yan, natatrack natin, di ba? Dapat yan, may records. I will expect or I will assume na may cash advance yan. Nag-draw ng cash advance yan. May ako dyan na, nag-draw yan ng cash advance. May disbursing officer yan. Yung disbursing officer, siya ang may hawak ng cash advance. Kapag dinraw mo yung cash advance, the process is, when you draw the cash advance, you have to state the purpose. Why are you drawing that cash advance? Bago makapagpagasolina yung presidential, he has to fill up a form na magsasabing, okay, magagasolina ako. Bakit? May lakad na ganito. At i-state din doon ano yung purpose ng ano. So everything is pwedeng i-track. The problem is, are they willing to do that? And to what extent will the documents be accessible to the public?
Ma'am, the disbursing officer is lodged with the office of the president, ganun?
Oo, bawat ano naman meron. Bawat ano meron. Meron niyang halimbawa, meron siguro siyang parang executive assistant or something. Yung minsan meron niyang finance officer or something. Meron niyang pinagkakatiwalaan na kumbaga yung parang pinakang kanang kamay na may hawak ng magdodraw ng cash advance siya. And
But
then,
di ba yung in-charge sa confidential fund?
ibang nature ng confidential funds, okay?
Ay, hindi pwede.
It is separate. Kaya nga ang sabi ko, hindi pwedeng sabihing irrelevant ang source. Kasi pag sinabi mong irrelevant ang source, pag kinuha nila sa confidential funds yan, hindi pwede. O, diba? So, ibig sabihin, hindi totoong irrelevant. Right?
Pero ma'am, that's assuming that people get to look into the disbursement of confidential funds. Kasi as far as we heard, nobody really checks.
Hindi naman yan.
Nobody really checks kasi wala namang resibo ang confidential funds eh. So long as mag-submit ng report of expenditure yung agency na tasked with the confidential or intelligence funds, it's taken for granted that what they said has to be true because there is no paperwork.
I'd like to clarify that there was a time na in-audit ang Intel funds during the time of President Cory Aquino. Ako yung nag-audit ng Intel funds ng Air Force.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, but that long ago?
But is that a regular practice? Or was that more of an
Explain it.
exception?
Ang kaibahan lang ng confidential funds, hindi ito na-audit ng resident auditors. We have resident auditors na, yung auditors who are in the agencies. Ang confidential funds, diretso yan, naka-envelope doon sa tinatawag nating office ng intern, ng tinatawag nating
the special
Intelligence and Confidential Funds Audit Office, ICFAO, under the office of the chair. So parang the chairman of the Commission on Audit may delegate such kind of audit. So in the case noong 1986 ba yan or 87, during time ni President Cory, dinelegate ni chairman doon sa team na ako ang nag-head. Kaya nakapag-audit ako ng Intel funds. It can be done. It is, mahirap naman sabihin hindi regular.
But it's discretionary.
Covered by intelligence funds. Okay, hindi to intelligence. At this point, because it's after the fact, nangyari na, do you have powers to, pwede ba silang sitahin ng COA or any other?
Ito muna ang unang tanong. Who dares look at the intelligence fund of the president?
Yun ang tanong eh, di ba? Parang, sino ngayon?
Tinitingnan namin Pinoy, madaming problema sa Intel funds ng panahon ni So tinitingnan namin yan nung panahon namin.
Yes, but ma'am, is it discretionary on the part of the chair of the COA? Or is there a level here where they're obligated to
Hindi
check?
siya discretionary. Nasa iyo yung authority You have the sole, you can delegate that, right? So hindi siya discretionary. You should, di ba? Lalo-lalo na, the rate it's going nowadays, nakalaki na ng Intel and confidence.
But to your point, you keep going back as far as the Aquino administrations as example. So if it's a matter of should, then why, I mean, I'm presuming that not all administrations.
That's why I can go back there. Masasabi ko, di ba? No, I'm no longer there. How can I say?
Okay.
I need to go back to Aquino because I was appointed and I was the commissioner. You introduced me as a state auditor, but I ended back my term as the commissioner of the Commission on Audit, right?
Okay, so
kami.
Okay, ma'am, so ngayon, kunyari, eto na tayo, pinag-uusapan to ng publiko, lahat yan ang tinatanong. sino ang opisyal na dapat tumingin kung ano nga ba ang
intelligence and quantity
paggastos?
audit. Yung director
Yung officer doon sa Malacanang.
No, there is a director under the office of the chair. Merong may hawak, merong director of intelligence and confidential audit. Pero sabi ko nga, you are assuming na yung ginamit sa dito chinards. I am not saying that. Wala ako sinasabi.
Yes, that's clear.
Sinasabi ko ay yung Confi at Intel funds under ng isang director ng office na Intelligence and Confidential Audit Office. Okay?
Okay.
Now,
Ma'am, balik
for
lang.
example, the use of the Gulf Stream. Okay, that's part of the presidential airwing lift under the AFP. Sino mag-audit noon? Sino magsabi, sino nagbigay ng authority to use this? Magkano ginastos?
Babalikan natin. Ano yung source ng fund? Okay? Aalamin muna natin ang source ng fund. Kasi baka regular operation. So general funds ito. Hindi yan sa Intel and Confi na auditor. It is under the President Auditor. Kaya nga, babalikan ko ulit. Relevant yung source ng fund.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, in that particular case, kasi may budget naman talaga yung presidente, yung OP para sa sa trips both local and abroad.
Foreign trips,
and what if they source it from that and therefore would that then be easily justified?
Pag sinorse siya sa foreign travel, which is actually foreign travel, then it depends on the appreciation of the auditor. Kasi nga ang doon, ang una niyang titingnan ay nasan yung authority ng travel para maipakita na Kasi kahit nasabihin mo ikaw yung presidente, for purposes of documentation, kasi public funds ito, at least magpa-file ka ng note, di ba, na ito ay travel, etc., di ba? Dahil presidente ka public official ka di ba?
Yes, ma'am. Pero ma'am, yung authority to travel, pwede yung presidente na pumirma niyan.
Actually, hindi na pinipirmahan. Siyempre, para namang obvious naman, di ba? Pero at least may documentation ka.
Yes, ma'am.
Di ba?
Yes, ma'am.
Nila per daya, di ba? Pero siyempre, per diem naman.
But here you're talking about you're talking about the staff, for example, PSG, pilots, crew, ganun.
Lahat ng kasama niya. Mag-control yan ng...
Ma'am, let me be a bit more specific. So sabi nga ni Bersamin, this is a personal trip, and then apparently they used the Gulf Stream, and possibly may ibang mga dagdag na gastos kasi syempre may kasamang PSG malamang yan. So personal trip at may dagdag na gastos on the part of the public, especially with the use of the airplane. Is there any law here where they possibly could have possibly violated, and what would this law be or regulation?
Na posibleng hindi nila na-violate?
Na posibleng na-violate nila?
Marami. Yun nga sinasabi kong 8555A on the irregular. Natatawa ako dahil I'm sure maraming auditor na nakikinig at for sure natatawa rin sila at siguro parang sinisilihan yung auditor ng Office of the President ngayon. Hindi ako magtataka kung biglang malipat yan.
So, ma'am, what's the law again?
Mahirap siya mag-draw the line, di ba? Kasi in fact, nagsalita ng Air Force kanina, sabi nila, yun daw presidential jet is meant for the use of the president. Sabi nila, tinatanong sila. So, how can you draw the line between personal and official trip, him being the president?
Choice ng presidente kasi, Pag sinabi niyang hindi siya official trip, meron siyang choice na mag-commute, na maggumamit ng commercial trip, di ba? Yun. Pero pag sinabi niyang, I will use this as prerogative niya yun as the president. At pag sinabi ng presidente, gagamitin ko to, that is in effect an order to the Air Force. So magiging official yung ng gasolina ng Air Force kasi they're following orders. Right?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I understand, ma'am. That's why we're asking kung ano yung
consequences ng decision niya.
Yes, ma'am. That's why we're asking, ma'am. In that case, what law or what regulation was violated if the president has that prerogative? Kasi here parang hinihimay natin kung ano yung pwedeng gawin legally at ano yung dapat bang ginawa.
Sa akin yung pa rin, yung irregular, unnecessarily unconscionable expenditure, yung pa rin. Pero hindi ko isasama doon yung lahat ng sumunod lang sa kanya. Kasi nga, I was trying to explain to you, diba? Kahit na sabihin personal, hindi mo pwedeng pabayaan yung presidente yun. Security, kung sinabi sa'yo, sumama ka, sasama ka. That's an official order.
And how much
Anong penalty sa mga ganyan? Yung mga napatunayan na unconscionable?
Yung expenses, ibabalik yung pera sa gobyerno.
Ibabalik.
Liability. Oo.
How-
Kaya i-disallow. But then, Siyempre may proseso yan, ano? Bago makapag-issue ng disallowance, kung yung iba, to be safe, mag-issue ka muna ng notice of suspension, okay, magpapaliwanag, etc. Mag-a-appeal sa director level, mag-a-appeal sa commission proper. Pag hindi satisfied, dadali sa Supreme Court. In other words, bago ma-revert yung mga hindi dapat na gastos, abot-abot, siyam-siyam na ang bago pa mangyari yun. So hanggat maaari talaga, tinatawag natin, as a public official, kailangan sumusunod ka doon sa tinatawag nating due diligence or the prudence of a good father of a family. Yun yung pamantayan eh. Bilang tatay, aalis ka, panunod ko nito. Sabi mo, personal to.
Yeah.
Dapat, it falls along the okay, hindi na lang ako magdadala ng jet. Hindi na lang ako magdadala ng ganito. Yung value for money yung mangingibabaw dito.
Speaking of the prudence of a good father, kasama niya yung anak niya. There's a gray area there as well because he's a congressman as well. I presume he's subject to the same rules.
May kasama artista wala akong kasama siya sa delegation.
We don't know. We don't know kung sino. But how does the rules apply? For example, how does that apply to Sandro Marcos hitching a ride?
Depende kung saan sila nag-draw ng funds. Nag-draw siya ng funds dun sa sarili niyang kasi sa congressman, meron siyang sarili mas marami siyang pwedeng funds na pagkuhanan, di ba? So again, mamatay na naman yung source ng pera na pinagkunan nila. Medyo very complicated ito kasi marami silang nag-travel, marami silang opisyales, and they're saying it's personal. Well, if it's personal, malinaw dapat. Walang government funds na dapat.
Yes, but in the meantime, on the matter of the plane, that is clearly public property. That is clearly property of the armed forces. There must be a record of everybody who was on that plane,
Of course. Sabi ko nga, bago pa lang mag-withdraw ng fuel, may documentation na yan di ba? Na andyan na dyan yung purpose. Why are you drawing your fuel? Where are you going? Who will be with you? Diba? Ipa-file mo yan At kapag yan ay in-audit, halimbawa, the auditor should be looking at that. Diba?
Sinong nananagot dyan, ultimately?
Okay. Meron tayong determination of persons liable. So determination of persons liable, tinitingnan mo yung kanilang participation. Anong participation? Siya ba ay taga-sunod? Siya ba ay taga-execute ng bigay ng order? Siya ba ay ganito? Pangalawa, is in a position to make some kumbaga parang meron ka bang desisyon na parang or talagang kailangan mong gawin yun because it is the nature of your function, parang ganyan. Tapos yung participation, yung yung ginawa mo, ganon. Pero sa kanila, ang dami-daming dapat tingnan Kung yun ay personal, yung congressman, nag-file ba siya ng leave? Kung Sabado yan, wala na kasi Sabado, di ba?
Kasama niya yung speaker.
Okay, oo. So, ano ang pwede nilang gamitin? Meron silang tinatawag na discretionary representation and allowance, okay? Pwede gamitin yan. Pero kung hindi official, hindi rin nila pwedeng gamitin yung discretionary, yung tinatawag nating representation and traveling allowance.
Okay. Marami pa po kaming tanong, kaya lang naubusan na kami ng oras. We will have to have you back for part 2, especially as I think more details and more questions arise from this. For now, ma'am, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mama.
Salamat din po. Magandang gabi.
Of course, former State Auditor Heidi Mendoza. Maraming salamat po. And we'll start up another conversation after the break. Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
Kasi yun ang talaga required Pero siguro naman itong mga...
Hindi pa nga expense ang Gusto ko lang malaman sinong nakiangkas
6-year closure of a portion of Meralco Avenue has taken effect, forcing motorists and commuters to start taking alternative routes.
Naglakad na lang ang ilang commuter matapos tuluyang isara ang bahagi ng Meralco Avenue sa Pasig para sa Metro Manila Subway Project. Bilyong-bilyong pisong pondo naman ang ilalaan para sa mga gigibayang establishmento.
The road from Shaw Boulevard to the front portion of Capitol Commons will be closed for 6 years.
The transportation departments aim to begin partial operations of the subway by 2027.
Welcome back to the Chiefs on One News. How are motorists coping with the closure of a road in Pasig City for the construction of the Metro Manila Subway system? We speak to the city's chief transport planner, Mr. Robert Anthony Siy. Magandang gabi, Sir Robert, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening,
sir.
Nice to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if you don't mind, tanungin ko na lang kayo, how are you related to Mr. Robert Siy, our guest last night?
Yeah, it's a little confusing. He is my father. I think it just so happened we're in the same
That's not
field.
confusing.
Okay, that actually explains everything.
Pareho pangalan.
Oo nga po eh. I think fortunately or unfortunately, it turned out that way.
Yes, sir. Oh, you shouldn't say that on air because he can watch this eventually. Sir, but anyway, you're the planning officer of Pasig City, and yun nga, yung main area kung saan nagsisimula, saan sinara, is also in Pasig City because you are, of course, a hub for a lot of cities in Metro Manila. And I suppose that's also the reason why dun sinimulan yung station construction. Kamusta ngayon ang sitwasyon ng traffic dyan?
Okay, I think, Ed, to be completely honest, it's a little difficult right now. I would say that right now we are in the adjustment period of any kind of transport disruption. I think it's the same thing everywhere. Every time you have a road closure, anytime you have let's say a closure of a certain stop or station of a public transport line, or if you have some other kind of disruption, the initial period is always going to be the most difficult. I think today and the last few days we've seen that. Yesterday was the first full day of the closure. Today is the second full day. I think we've really seen, as expected, there is some traffic congestion. There are still motorists who are still continuing to take the route, and I think we are still at the stage where people are starting to evaluate their decisions when it comes to planning their trips in and around the area.
Saan tumutukod ngayon? I'm sorry, I'm using the word that's always used by the MMDA guy, si EDSA chief, tumutukod-tukod yung traffic. Saan ngayon tumutukod-tukod dahil dyan sa pagsasara ng ereng yan?
Actually po, to be completely honest, today it was my first time na personally na-experience ko na tumutukod actually yung kalsada dito sa Ultra. Yung, di ba meron po tayong sloping road that goes down from the end of Capitol Commons down past Ultra towards Lucas Avenue. Today po was my first time actually seeing that na nakaback up, or in, as we say in traffic management, na tumutukod talaga siya eh. So I think we're at the point where we're still seeing that. It's going to be a little bit of a difficult adjustment period, but as we want to ensure everybody, this is really necessary for the construction of the subway station, and soon we will have that modern transportation system that we've always dreamed of.
How are you managing even before this closure, sobrang congested na nung area na yan. Lalo na Pasig because flashpoint kayo di ba? Naman nanggagaling sa Mandaluyong, Antipolo, di ba? Parang doon nga precisely nagla-landing ang lahat ng mga vehicles, no? How are you managing that, considering that even before this project, before this closure, sobrang challenge na yan traffic-wise? Will the rerouting really ease the challenge of this project?
To be honest, Ma'am Luchi, I would say that in terms of the challenge of managing transportation in a city like Pasig City, tama po yung sinabi mo, we are the hub for many places and many trips in Metro Manila. I think many north to south, and actually importantly, the east to west trips. We are the gateway to Metro Manila from the LGUs east of us in Rizal Province. We are bordered by 7 LGUs. So actually, lahat po ng traffic nila dumadaan sa amin. Minsan, actually, napagbibintangan yung traffic sa amin, but in reality, it's really many people going through along many trips going through our LGU. To be quite honest, it's always been quite a challenge. And pag sinabi po natin yung rerouting, there's only so many places you can go. there's not really any space to build new roads because we are really quite built up already. So yung strategy natin sa Pasig City is to really promote sustainable and less congestive modes of transportation. It's become very important for us to push to make our city more walkable, to make our city more bikeable, and to work together with the DOTR to make our city more friendly for public transportation.
Yes, and to that point about making it a more sustainable city, hopefully inspiring a more sustainable country in general. We know that the mayor and the administration is much more progressive when it comes to making it more biker-friendly, more pedestrian-friendly. We know, for that matter, the advocacy of your father. So there's that pressure on the city planner as well. But to that point, is there a future here where right now you're closing this off to vehicular traffic? Does this actually present an opportunity for the city to say that, you know what? I mean, 6 years from now when this is opened, why bring back the vehicular traffic here? Is this an area that actually presents itself as an opportunity for you to basically redo it more sustainably with something more progressive for pedestrians and bikers?
Robbie, I'm really glad you asked that question because one of my friends, we have a network actually of some other city planners and some other transport planners in the different LGUs. And this was actually suggested to me. I won't name my colleague for now because the idea might be a little controversial. But then there is talk actually. There are some proposals to actually, if we learn to live without the road closure for a while. I mean, there have been some people asking why not turn it into something like a public park? Why not give it to do something for the next generation for their open space? Now, of course, nothing's final. Of course, this is just a suggestion, and it will be subject, of course, to all the proper evaluations. And when such a proposal becomes formalized, then we can really talk about it and really talk about investing in it. But I think it's definitely something we talk about a lot. If there's an opportunity to make a decision that can steer us towards the course of being more sustainable, then we are, of course, eager to look at that and see if those choices are feasible.
Well, in the meantime, katakot-takot ng traffic ngayon eh. So, are you getting reports of spillovers, for example, sa EDSA? Marami nakapaligid dyan sa inyo na major thoroughfares. Are you getting reports na lumilipat na doon yung naaapektuhan na din sila ng traffic?
It's actually, I think what we're looking at is that we're still, of course, in the adjustment period. We are getting many reports. Of course, it's a little challenging sometimes as you're observing traffic in real time to really, I guess, attribute where the spillover congestion is coming from. So, of course, if we observe increased congestion on other roads, we have to, of course, isolate to see whether it's really coming from this or whether the cause is something else, if there's a disruption somewhere else in the system. I think one thing we do see is that on some of the other routes, actually, we've observed on some routes that not all of them have actually seen that kind of spillover yet. But, of course, I think as part of the adjustment, some motorists will adjust their routes, some will adjust their modes of travel, some will adjust the time at which they travel, and some people might actually choose different destinations to travel as opposed to here. So there's actually many ways we expect motorists to adjust to this situation.
And paano yung mga businesses dyan? Sorry.
You have special preparations ba for Christmas? Dahil napaka-commercial area ng...
Exactly.
Yes.
And how do you cushion the impact of this project on businesses in the area? Halimbawa, there's Estancia Mall dyan, no? And of course, not to mention the other malls there. But never mind that, because many of the malls in Pasig, especially Ortigas, are accessible through EDSA, no? But yung nasa looban, like Estancia, paano yung mga negosyo doon? And also the gentrified area there, di ba? Yung, ano ba yun? Yung, the part, yung Capitolio, yan. Paano yung mga yun? Iiwasan yung tuloy, di ba?
Saka yung motel.
Ay, ikaw lang sabi niya, hindi ako
Gentrified.
Gentrified, ang dami ng mga ano doon, cafes, di ba?
It's actually quite interesting. I think there's a joke that we transport planners tell each other that there's so much traffic there that nobody goes there anymore, which is kind of I think it's a little of an ironic statement when you think about it.
Yeah.
I think what we're trying to do, of course, we're in constant communication with the business owners in the area. Of course, this road closure and the traffic scheme was really planned with the different businesses and especially the big landowners, of course, at the table with us, helping to manage traffic along their privately owned roads. One thing I'm really proud of when we're working with Ortigas and Company is that they were actually very forward-thinking with us in terms of helping make their developments accessible to people coming by bicycle. I think it really has contributed to the morning business they have with people coming for breakfast, with the popularity of cycling as a sport. They actually worked with us. I think over the last few years, we've actually seen, I believe, like a 500% increase in their bicycle parking spaces, which really opened their business and really created a new morning and evening weekend market also in the area. So I think we're really trying to help businesses adapt. As part of, cycling being a part of our advocacy during the pandemic is something we want to continue even in the new normal. And that way we really want to make sure that if it's difficult to come here by car, we want to make sure that businesses have other ways of attracting customers to their area.
Robert, if you don't mind, I mean, maybe just an opportunity because I'm really curious about this because matagal na naman yung plano for the subway, so people knew. But maybe just to understand the process for selecting the sites for the stations, why there? I mean, what went? I mean, geologically, environmentally, business-wise, traffic-wise, why put the station at that particular spot? What went into that?
Okay, Robbie, I think it's a little difficult for me to answer that. I was not involved in the site selection for the subway stations, but I think I guess maybe to talk about how we'd arrive at such a decision, obviously I think we would consider if geological and ecological conditions are suitable for it. Is the soil structure hard enough to allow you to construct that deep? Can you construct that deep? Are there utilities that you'll get in the way of? Of course, something we're also looking at is how do we create new links to our business districts, from homes to shops to public services, and draw a line where you can build an efficient rail station. I think when, I guess to hypothesize if when we were looking at the Ortigas Center CBD, this is basically a very active central business district. That's why we actually have two stations. Aside from Shaw Boulevard and Meralco Avenue, there's also a station further up Meralco Avenue at Metro Walk. I think basically an important question to ask here is if we don't build this kind of high-capacity public transport, what will happen eventually when you have all this building happening and no way to move people efficiently? So I think that was also an important consideration. Where you have an active business district, it becomes a matter of necessity really to connect it to efficient and high-capacity public transport.
Now just quickly, because as we said, this affects a lot of businesses, but precisely because the blueprint for this was there for a long time already, is it safe to assume that the businesses and the investors in that area, especially over the past, let's say over the past few years, if not the past full decade, that should have been factored in? Or were they aware that, by the 2020s, magkakaroon ng matagalan na building dito? Did the investors and the establishments there know all this time na, this was in the schedule, in the pipeline a long time already? Everybody knew.
Right. Well, I'm not sure if I can really say that everybody knew, but I believe that the location of the stations here, I do believe it's been a matter of public record for at least, I would say, just guessing, at least 4 or 5 years now. So I think talking about like long-term business location for people investing in property, for people investing in commercial or residential developments, it certainly was something considered. And I think it's certainly something that we hope will make the area more attractive to not just to investors, but to people who want to start and raise their families. It's obviously a great amenity to be able to live near public transportation that will be as modern and very as efficient as this.
Their city lies along near the Marikina Fault. Wala bang concern yung mga residente about possibly the big one or any major earthquake kung sakasakali?
Yeah, it's a matter of really, of course, it's something that's being considered. What we do know is that anytime there's a development, anytime there's a matter of constructing something, especially a project this ambitious, world-class consultants are retained by agencies like the DOTR. Anyone building a building here does have to comply with the National Building Code for large developments. We do require really deep and detailed geological studies for that. there is, of course, always the danger of natural phenomena happening, but it's something which we believe that if all the steps are followed in the systems, there are ample preparations made for that.
Okay, Robert Anthony Siy. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Siy is the Chief Transport Planner for Pasig City. And that is it for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Roby Alampay.
I'm Mami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Luchi Cruz-Valdes, News 5.
I'm at Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.